So, we're thinking of moving everyone over here once the third one's born, Sissy said in her straightforward manner. With the kids growing up, our current apartment is just too cramped. You want the kids to be able to run around freely, right? It's impossible to just move out of the blue. All the rooms are taken. Then, Tim and his family can leave. Tim doesn't have kids, so it should be fine, right? Just move out now. As Tim and I were baffled by her words, a scream from Tim's wife, Emily, filled the air. Sissy's eldest child, Isaac, had shot Emily with a water gun. I hurriedly took the water gun away from Isaac. Why would you do something like this? This lady is a bad person. That's why God is angry and made her unable to have children. Isaac didn't understand why he was being scolded and looked like he was about to cry. What have you been telling your child? It's not true. Emily just can't love children. If she really wanted kids, she wouldn't need fertility treatments to conceive, right? I'm living proof. I love my children, so God has blessed me with them. Meanwhile, Emily has been undergoing fertility treatments for years and still doesn't have any children. Enough. Emily stopped Tim's clenched fist, saying, "It's okay." All right. If Sissy insists that much, I'll leave this house. If you had just agreed from the start. You're nothing but a burden eating away at this house's wealth. After having her say, Sissy left with a satisfied look on her face. My name is Roseanne. I'm a housewife who turned 50 this year. Currently, I live in a two-family home with my husband, Christopher, and my son and his wife, making 4 of us. Tim has always been serious. After graduating from college, he got a job at a major trading company and married Emily, a colleague, when he was 23. Emily was 4 years older than Tim, so my husband and I were a bit surprised when we first heard about their marriage. But Emily was kind-hearted and good at cooking, so I was confident we could trust Tim with her. Tim and I will build a warm family together. I was an only child, so I'd like to have many children if possible. A lively family has always been my dream, Emily said, her eyes shining with hope for the future. However, they struggled to have children. As she approached 30, she became anxious and started fertility treatments with Tim's consultation. Despite not achieving their hoped-for results, Emily never forgot to smile, saying, "The weather is nice today, why don't we all do a barbecue?" and actively tried to build a relationship with us. Moved by her attitude, I felt a desire to protect Emily like my own daughter and encouraged her, "Don't rush your feelings. As long as you keep smiling like that, God will reward you someday." Speaking of kids, I've got another daughter. Tim's got 8 years on her. She was our long-awaited girl, born when I was 30. Her name's Sissy. Since Tim, it had been a while since we had a kid, so maybe that's why my husband and I spoiled her rotten. When Sissy and I went shopping, she'd point at toys on the shelves, saying, "Mom, I want that one. Buy it for me," with those adorable eyes, and I couldn't bring myself to say no, so I ended up buying them more often than not. As a result, Sissy grew up to be quite the little tyrant. After Tim got a job and became a working adult, he said, "Maybe it's time we teach Sissy about the harsh realities of the world, like common sense," with a serious look on his face, and I had to admit, "You're right. What you're saying makes sense." Reflecting on our parenting up until that point, I felt remorse. As Sissy became a high schooler, she started showing more rebellious attitudes towards us and started coming home late. "Do you have any idea what time it is?" I was worried sick. "I didn't ask you to worry about me," she'd retort, sighing as she took off her shoes, mumbling, "Ugh, I hate that teacher," seemingly making enemies of all the adults around her who tried to admonish her. "This is all our fault as parents," I'd fret, watching my daughter's sullen face. Then one day, Sissy, who had been playing games in her room, suddenly rushed out and ran into the bathroom. I thought she might be feeling sick, but I quickly realized that wasn't it.
"Could it be that you're? What's it to you? It's none of your business."
That was the first time I realized my daughter was pregnant. "You're still underage. You need to think more seriously about your life," Tim lectured Sissy, but it was too late since there was already a baby on the way. And as soon as Sissy graduated high school, she ran off with Sullivan, a young favorite from a nightclub, as if eloping.
"That girl, she's only 18. Can she really manage carrying a child into the future?"
When I voiced my worries, my husband Christopher, though worried about Sissy at heart, said, "Let her be. She's nothing but trouble," trying to sound indifferent. My fears were confirmed when Sissy, after having her first child, would come home saying, "Mom, I'm really struggling this month. Can you lend me $1,000? Asking for money. Sissy's husband, Sullivan, used to be the top earner at the club, but once the regulars heard he was married with a kid, his popularity cooled off and his sales plummeted. All these women, not even my girlfriends, complaining all the time. Got me fired, thanks to them. What a nuisance," he said, seemingly unbothered by his unemployment, laughing it off as if it were a joke. "Sullivan, what kind of work are you doing now?" Even when Christopher, acting as Sissy's dad, pressed him, Sullivan just laughed. "I'm looking for all sorts of jobs, but can't seem to find one that suits my charm." Maybe it's the environment? Care and food service aren't really for me. Don't blame the environment. You're a dad now. How do you plan to support your family? It's not the time to be picky about jobs. I couldn't help but get irritated by Sullivan's lackadaisical attitude and all talk, no action stance. When Tim chimed in, Sissy, already pregnant with their second child, snapped back, "That's lame, Tim. Being a boring salaryman like Tim is just too dull, right? Sullivan has dreams, unlike Tim, so don't make him do any boring job anyone can do. What's so boring about it? I'm just doing my best with what I can. It's with the salary I earn that we can support our family. Don't mock those who work hard for a living." Sissy mocking Tim, the salaryman, wasn't new. When Tim landed his job, Sissy, just starting middle school, said, "Being a salaryman is so lame." Can't even brag about it to friends, genuinely sighing in dismay. So, what job would you have preferred? A musician, an idol, an influencer. Oh, but with Tim, none of those are an option. Average looking and hopeless in life, Tim. Sissy made a comment that implied Tim was worthless. Years passed, but Sissy's mentality remained childlike. It seems we significantly misjudged how to raise our daughter. In front of a pregnant Sissy, Tim, shaking with anger, could only suppress his fury by hitting his own thigh. After Sissy had her energetic second child, she started mocking not only Tim but also his wife, Emily. "Did you start fertility treatments? Because I got pregnant with my second, did that make you panic? It's so funny. Aren't you over 30 now? Isn't it too late for you? Hey, Sissy. There are things that are okay to say and things that are not. That was way too harsh on Emily. Apologize to her." Despite Tim's outrage, Sissy, without any remorse, flaunted her second child to Emily, saying, "Look, the sad aunt who can't have kids." As the child started crying, Sissy mockingly comforted it. There, the aunt scared you. didn't she? While Emily, trying to hold back tears, looked away. When Emily, feeling unbearable, stood up to leave the room, Sissy stopped her. Emily, how much have you actually spent on fertility treatments? If you have that much money, wouldn't it be better spent on my children? It's such a bother, women who can't have children. Stop it, Sissy! Emily, you don't have to listen to her. Tim intervened. It's because Tim always coddles you that you haven't been able to have children. You better hurry up before you get too old. Emily cried quietly in another room, but I felt that any words from me would only pressure her more, so I couldn't bring myself to say anything. Listening to children's laughter should cheer you up, right, Mom? If only Emily could give you grandchildren, you wouldn't have anything to worry about. What a useless wife you got. Saying so, Sissy attempted to make me hold her baby right in front of Emily, who was watching. Then next month, I'll be counting on you for money again, Mom, she said, as if it was the most natural thing, taking with her an envelope containing $1,000. A year later, Emily's smile had gradually disappeared. I invited her to meals numerous times, hoping to see her bright smile again, but every time we saw a family with children at the restaurant, she sighed. Each time, I felt sorry, regretting that my good intentions had backfired. One day, Sissy visited us as usual. I have some really happy news for everyone today. What is it? Did Sullivan finally find a job? I asked, hoping slightly. No, it's not about that, Sissy said with a beaming smile, making a big deal out of it. In fact, I'm pregnant with a third child. Mom, you're going to have a third grandchild soon. Isn't that great, Mom? Having a daughter who's given you 3 energetic grandchildren. Sissy laughed triumphantly, glancing at Emily, who looked down. But before that, I've asked numerous times, has Sullivan found a job? Oh, come on. That doesn't matter right now. Praise me more for being pregnant with the third child. You're happy about it too, right, Mom? Worried about Emily's feelings, I couldn't genuinely rejoice over Sissy's pregnancy. Lost for words, I remained silent, and Christopher took over. How can you say earning a living doesn't matter? How are you going to live, having 3 children without working? This is unfair to the children being born. Christopher, of course, wasn't blaming the addition of another grandchild. The problem was that the father of the upcoming child had no intention of working. Whenever Sullivan visited with Sissy and the topic of work came up, he'd hastily excuse himself, saying, I'm going out to buy cigarettes, and escape. Seeing this, my spouse and I would exchange looks and sigh, realizing he was still unemployed. So, we're thinking of moving here once the third child is born. Sissy spoke in such a casual tone that I almost missed it. Wait a minute. Move in here? Of course, where else would we move? This house is like my parental home, so there's no problem if we move in, right? Indeed, our family moved into this house when Tim and his wife got married, living together as a 2-family household. But this wasn't the home where Sissy was born. Besides, with 3 kids growing up, our current apartment will be too cramped. Kids need to run around and have fun, right? What do you think? It's impossible just to spring that on us. No matter how big the house is, all the rooms are occupied by the 4 of us living here, including Tim and his wife. There's no room for you to move in. It may sound cold, but it's the reality. I thought this would make Sissy give up and leave, but she glared at Emily menacingly and said, then, Tim and his family should just move out. Tim has a stable job and a salary, right? That should be enough for him. And since Tim doesn't have children, it's perfect, isn't it? There's no reason for him to cling to this house, so he and Emily should leave right now. As we were bewildered by Sissy's unreasonable demand, "Stop it. That's cold, stop." Suddenly, Emily's scream echoed. Sissy's eldest child, Isaac, had squirted water at Emily with a water gun. I hurriedly took the water gun from Isaac's hand. "Why would you do such a thing? You must apologize if you've done something wrong." "But Mom said this auntie is a bad person. That's why God is angry and made her unable to have children." Isaac genuinely believed it and couldn't understand why he was being scolded, his face on the verge of tears.
I glared at Sissy, Isaac's mother, and said, "What have you been telling your child?"
"Well, it's the truth. Emily probably can't love children. If you really wish for children, you don't need to spend a lot of money on fertility treatments. Children are naturally conceived, right? I'm the proof. I love my children. That's why God is watching over me and blessed me with children. Unlike Emily, who's been wasting money on fertility treatments for years without any results. Do you see any children around her? Enough already. Teaching your child baseless, unscientific things and letting him harass others is wrong, even for a mother." Tim finally raised his voice, but far from being remorseful, Sissy retorted with a sneer, "It doesn't hurt or itch me what a childless Tim says. And maybe the reason Emily can't have children is partly due to Tim?" Emily, with her fists clenched, desperately stopped Tim. "It's okay. If Sissy insists so much, I'll leave this house." Contrary to the tearfully biting her lip Emily, Sissy smirked triumphantly. "If you had been honest from the start, it would have been better. You're just a nuisance, eating away at the house's wealth," and left with a satisfied look after throwing insults at Emily until the very end. The house went quiet once Sissy and her family left. "So, we've decided to leave. Thank you for everything," Tim said, bidding us goodbye. "We need to decide where to live and prepare." As Tim and Emily got up to go to their room, I stopped them. "Wait. We're coming with you." "What?" "I can't forgive Sissy's terrible behavior either. So, we're also leaving this house." Looking at Christopher sitting next to me, he nodded firmly. "I'm of the same mind." A month passed. Opening the bedroom curtains, I could see a vast vegetable garden through the window. Opening the window to let in the fresh air, I felt wrapped in a mysteriously gentle sensation, as if both my body and soul were being soothed. While not all the fields in view were ours, a local farmer had lent us a section for our family. Almost every day, someone from the neighborhood would leave vegetables they'd grown at our doorstep without a word. "Roseanne, look! We got such a big cabbage!" Emily exclaimed, her eyes shining like an innocent girl. Emily, who had been devastatingly upset the night Sissy demanded they leave, seemed to have regained some peace over the past month. Sometimes, watching the neighborhood children run around, Emily would smile wistfully, and I felt a tightness in my chest, knowing nothing I could say would help right now. "There's a festival in the neighborhood next month. I'll try to help out with the preparations if I have time." "Where's Dad?" Christopher went to greet the chairman of the pest control group. "There are a lot of boars around here, so Christopher wants to contribute to the local community." Our lives have completely changed since moving here, surrounded by rich nature, feeling refreshed in both body and soul compared to before. Tim, now allowed to work remotely, has set up a home office and is dedicated to his work. Though moving from the city to an unfamiliar countryside life has its inconveniences, being freed from the daily commute, Tim smiles peacefully. "This place is heaven." My mobile phone rang, and when I looked at the screen, it was Sissy's name. "Oh, it's been a month. How are you feeling?" I asked as a mother concerned about her pregnant daughter's health, but on the other end of the line, Sissy was far from calm, yelling, "What's going on?" When I went to pack up and visit the family home today, there was a vacant sign in front of the house. "You know something, right? Explain this to me." "It's exactly as you saw. The house is currently vacant." "If the sign is still there, it means no one has moved in yet, doesn't it?" "Why?" "Knowing we were going to move, is this some kind of harassment?" "It's not harassment. You were the one who told Emily to leave that house." "I did say that, but that doesn't mean you all had to leave too, right?" "Where are you now?" "Where am I?" "I'm at my own home, of course." "So, your own home isn't this house where I am now?" "What's going on?" I decided to briefly explain the situation up to this point. A month after Sissy made the unreasonable demand for Emily to leave the house, I moved to a new home with Tim and his wife. The home was previously occupied by elderly relatives who are now in a facility, allowing us to rent it. When we were looking for a new place to live and asked around, Christopher's cousin mentioned a vacant house. "I just wanted Tim and his family to leave." "But why did you all have to leave as well? Do you dislike me that much? Is that woman who can't have children so important?" We couldn't forgive your words. There was silence on the other end of the call. "You mocked Emily, who is trying hard with fertility treatments, but you too were born thanks to fertility treatment." "What?" "I got married at 20 and had Tim at 22. Despite the fear surrounding my first childbirth, fortunately, Tim was born without any issues and grew up healthy. When Tim started kindergarten and I began to feel a bit more relaxed about parenting, I started thinking about having a second child. The trigger was Tim seeing a friend's younger sister and saying, 'I want a brother or sister too.' Christopher and I thought it would be nice to have another child since two would make things more lively, and at 27, I thought I still had plenty of time to have and raise another child. However, despite our efforts, getting pregnant again didn't happen as quickly as we hoped, and we started to feel a bit anxious, so we consulted with an obstetrician who suggested fertility treatments. We followed the doctor's advice and adjusted our lifestyle, but despite our efforts, there were no signs of pregnancy, and I began to feel desperate as I approached 30. When I visited the clinic for a checkup, I saw a woman with a swollen belly, a young boy cuddling up to her, talking to the baby about to be born. While I found it heartwarming, I couldn't help but think, why not me, as my thoughts inevitably drifted to a darker place. Christopher tried to reassure me, "Don't worry so much." "But if we keep waiting, it'll only get harder to have children." Christopher never snapped back at me. Instead, he would smile quietly and hug me gently. On my 30th birthday, feeling something was off, I rushed to the bathroom and found a positive result on a pregnancy test, leading us to the hospital. "Congratulations, you're pregnant." That year, we were blessed with you. "Thank you. I'm so glad to finally meet you, Sissy." "Sissy, I'm your big brother. Let's get along." I was truly happy when you were born. Not just me, but Christopher and Tim, we all celebrated your arrival. Yet, you said such terrible things to Emily, who's struggling with fertility treatments. I just couldn't forgive you. I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't know I was born through fertility treatments. I'll change and reflect. Please forgive me. Can we come back? That's impossible. We've already left that house, and it wasn't ours to begin with. What do you mean it wasn't ours? That house was rented to us at a low cost by Emily's dad for our sake. You might not have known, but we paid rent every month. I wasn't told about this. What are we going to do now? We've already given up our apartment. We have nowhere to live. There's a place right in front of you. It's vacant, so that's fortunate for you, Sissy. All right, I'll live in this house. But a month later, the rent is too high. Isn't there something wrong with this house? Is that so? We had a special deal because of Emily, but the actual rent is usually high. It has a large backyard suitable for barbecues, you know? Don't talk like it's someone else's problem. You know, right, Mom? Sullivan has no income. How can we afford such high rent, not even for a month? That's your problem, isn't it? I can't do anything about it. Can't you lend me just the money for the rent? You do think of me as your dear daughter, right? It's impossible. Do you have any idea how much money we've lent you already? Because of you, we've lost our savings for retirement. Even if we had the money, we wouldn't lend it to you. Somehow, Sissy found out where Emily was receiving her medical treatments and ambushed her at the clinic. You figured out this place pretty well, didn't you? It was easy to find out. In a place like this, there's only one clinic. But Emily, please, I'm begging you. Ask your dad to reduce our rent. There's no need for that. This person is a stranger to us now. I won't ask my dad either. We refuse your request, Sissy. Then you'll at least take care of the kids, right? They are your dear grandchildren. It's going to be tough with the new baby coming, and it would really help if you could look after them. No matter what you say, I have no intention of helping you anymore. Let's go, Emily. Later, I heard rumors about Sullivan not even trying to find a job and their two restless children, crying and scattering food around. Surrounded by her family, Sissy gave birth to her third child. A few months later, frustrated, Emily's dad evicted the Sissy family for not paying rent. Curious about how they were settling into their new public housing, I sometimes went to check on them. I'm tired from job hunting. Sullivan would shout. You're just playing around with no money. Sissy retorted as neighbors stepped outside, sighing at yet another scene. Returning home, the smell of stew from the kitchen whet my appetite. Emily, noticing my return, ran over. You seem to be glowing today, Emily. Did something good happen? Actually, I'll announce it at dinner. When dinner time came, Christopher and Tim gathered in the dining room. Seeing Emily smiling more brightly than usual made everyone else naturally start smiling too. I have something to tell you. I'm finally pregnant. Congratulations, Emily. Christopher, silent, covered his face with his hands, his shoulders shaking. Come on, you're going to be a dad. And you, Mom, your face is all tear-streaked. What a wonderful night it was. Imagining our life as a family of 5, I couldn't stop my tears and smiles. For 40 years, I've been the backbone of my family. I prioritized them over myself, investing more time and energy into their well-being than my own. My husband, Richard, who was once so kind before we married, changed. He became obsessed with gambling, accumulating debt, and even having affairs, all while neglecting our children. Despite everything, I was betrayed by Richard and my sister Susan. We don't need the housekeeper, Deborah, anymore. Richard passionately argued about Susan's allure over mine. Richard, come live with me. Susan smirked as if she had everything planned. After throwing the divorce papers at me, they left triumphantly. The surge of hatred, disbelief, sadness, and pain. A series of misfortunes awaited. She never intended to be friends with me. I was completely used by Susan. I felt all my efforts were in vain, leaving me utterly exhausted. During this time, Nancy, my son Joseph's wife, offered her support. Noticing my distress, she approached me. I managed to calm my heart and shared everything with Nancy. She listened patiently and kindly to the end. When I mentioned Susan's name, Nancy fell silent, deep in thought. Suddenly, she asked to see the security camera footage, which puzzled me, but I showed her the recordings. The moment I showed her, Nancy smiled and uttered shocking words.
"That's great." "Huh?"
I didn't understand and asked Nancy what she meant.
"Well, those two."
Nancy began to reveal a shocking truth. I am Deborah, 63 years old. Living with my 65-year-old retired husband, Richard, I've been supporting him as a housewife. Supporting Richard is hard and tiring, but there were moments I enjoyed. One of them was meeting my sister, Susan. Though we're not related by blood, I call her my sister. Why do I refer to someone seemingly unrelated as my sister? Going back 46 years, I met Susan when I was 17. My beloved mom had passed away from an illness. Since then, Dad seemed lonely and lost his zest for life. Dad began to drink more and more, and I was worried about him. It seemed he didn't want to come home anymore. Gradually, Dad started going out at night. Honestly, I didn't want to come home much either, as it reminded me of Mom. One day, after being out late, Dad came home with a woman and a little girl I didn't recognize.
"Dad, who are these people?"
I asked, surprised by the sudden visitors. Dad told me the woman was Sandra, his lover from the pub.
"This woman has been a savior to me."
It turned out Dad had been frequenting the pub to fill the loneliness after Mom's passing, and Sandra had become his emotional support. Susan was Sandra's daughter. Since Sandra was also single, it didn't take long for them to get along. Eventually, Sandra and Susan, who is 14 years younger than me, moved in with Dad. Ugh. This is really irresponsible. Honestly, I didn't want to see Dad's messy affairs and wished he'd kept that away from me. But seeing Dad happy for the first time in a while made me feel relieved. He had been so down lately, I decided to overlook it. Having a cute sister-like figure, despite the 14-year age gap, was really joyful for me, who never had siblings. Coming home to play pretend with Susan or play with dolls was heartwarming. It felt like what having a sister would be like. When Susan laughed as we played, it warmed my heart. My house, which I once dreaded returning to, became a place I couldn't wait to get back to. Life was surprisingly enjoyable, but it didn't last long. When I turned 18, Dad passed away. It was probably due to his excessive smoking and drinking. I warned him many times, but he wouldn't stop, and his health deteriorated. The funeral was the next day, and seeing Dad, who was once full of life, lying lifeless in the coffin was heart-wrenching. Dad had his faults, but after Mom died, he raised me alone. I hadn't repaid him for that, which filled me with sadness. I wished I had done something to repay him. I regretted so much in my heart. After Dad's death, Sandra and Susan moved away to be with another man. I was shocked by how quickly Sandra moved on, but more than that, I was deeply saddened by being separated from Susan. Even though we weren't related by blood, she was my only sister. I was left completely alone. But now, with Dad gone, I had to think about my own life. There was no time to dwell on the sadness of Dad's death or the reluctance to part with Susan. I had relatives handle the house's cleanup and disposal and immediately looked for a job with a dormitory. I didn't have time for sorting and disposing of things, and focusing on job hunting seemed like the best way to avoid being overwhelmed by grief. Finding a job was incredibly challenging for me, given my limited education. It seemed almost impossible to find anyone willing to hire me. There were times I nearly gave up during my job hunt, but I persevered. Eventually, my efforts paid off, and I landed a job. I was hired to work in a hospital as an administrative assistant. The job was tough, but my boss was kind and taught me well. That boss turned out to be my future husband, Richard. We gradually became close through work and started seeing each other privately. I enjoyed spending time with Richard immensely. Perhaps because he was 2 years older, he seemed to know so much about everything, and I found our conversations fascinating and him incredibly attractive. Before long, I realized I had feelings for Richard. Then, one day, as we were spending time together as usual, Richard suddenly confessed his feelings for me. "Would you consider dating me?" I couldn't believe it at first, thinking my feelings were unrequited. Yet, I admired Richard in every way, both professionally and personally, and the idea of being approached by a man I was interested in thrilled me. That's how our relationship began, and it went smoothly from there. Richard treated me like a princess, cherishing me deeply. I thought being married to Richard would mean living happily every day. Inspired by this thought, I dedicated myself to him. Cherishing each other brought us immense happiness. "Deborah, will you marry me?" I was happy until the moment I retired from the hospital job to marry Richard and he proposed. Those were probably the happiest times of my life. However, after we got married, Richard's attitude changed drastically. Richard turned out to be what you might call a henpecked husband. Things became difficult after that. Even though I was busy with household chores on weekends, Richard would just sleep at home.
"Richard, I really need help with the housework. It's too much for me alone." "That's your job, Deborah. I'm exhausted from working all week. You should be able to handle this."
Where had the kind Richard gone? I should have realized something was wrong then, but I was too naive and kept blaming myself. During this time, Richard and I had 2 children. Our first son, Joseph, and then Thomas. Even after the children were born, Richard hardly helped around the house, so I was left to take care of the kids and Richard almost entirely on my own. Joseph and Thomas were a handful. They were going through adolescence and rebellious phases, and being boys, they ate a lot, so I had to cook in large quantities. Raising Joseph and Thomas was draining, both physically and emotionally. When they left home, I felt a mix of loneliness and pride in seeing them grow up, which always warms my heart when I think about it. And for 40 years, I've supported Richard, Joseph, and Thomas as a housewife. Of course, it wasn't always smooth sailing over these 40 years. In fact, there were more hardships than not. Richard became obsessed with gambling afterward and racked up debt. Furthermore, he had affairs, which was very hard on me. I even came close to depression and sometimes thought about divorce. Our irritations led to fights, and gradually, Richard and I stopped having proper conversations. I wondered how things got to this point and if it was all right to continue this way. However, thinking of the children, I believed it was better for them to have their dad around and persevered. Perhaps due to that effort, Joseph became a general contractor, and Thomas found a job at a trading company. I am proud of Joseph and Thomas. Recently, Joseph married Nancy, whom he had been dating for many years. Nancy is very polite, has her own opinions, and is friendly and adorable. Seeing Joseph happy made my heart warm. I'm glad I worked hard to raise them to this point. I can't wait to see my grandchildren. Though I never said it out loud, that's what I was thinking. Then, I turned 60. One day, while I was at the hospital for a routine checkup, I noticed a woman in the waiting room and was startled. She looked just like Susan had grown up from the little girl she once was. I thought it might be a case of mistaken identity, but decided to speak up. Excuse me, do you have a moment? The woman turned around, a bit surprised. Yes, who are you? It was definitely Susan. I recognized her immediately, even though she had grown up. Seeing her made me feel relieved, and I nearly teared up, but I held back not to trouble Susan. Then, I gathered my courage and invited Susan to a cafe. On the day, I talked about the time we lived together. About the year we spent together, playing pretend and with dolls. Unfortunately, Susan didn't remember me. That made sense. Susan was about 4 years old then, and considering Sandra. She probably moved around a lot with her constantly changing partners. I felt sad, but if there were many such changes, my memory would be a minor detail to her. Yet, Susan entertained my stories, smiling as if we weren't strangers. Her smile, even as an adult, was just as adorable and unchanged. I didn't want to grow distant like before. I wanted to become closer, so we exchanged phone numbers. Time flew by when I was with Susan. I think we've become quite close this time. I resolved not to have regrets this time, and made an effort to keep in touch. Before long, Susan and I started meeting occasionally. Initially, I was the one who invited her, but eventually, Susan began to invite me as well. It felt like having a close sister who was also a friend, which made me very happy. I never thought we'd meet again, so it was all the more special. Being able to talk and laugh with Susan again brought me immense happiness, and I found myself frequently mentioning Susan to Richard. Our conversations about Susan were lively, a rarity between Richard and me. Let me meet Susan next time, Richard said, surprising me with his unusual interest. Given his usual indifference to my affairs, I felt a leap of joy that he showed interest. It had been years since we had talked so deeply. It felt like our once cold relationship was warming up again, reminiscent of old times. Susan seemed to be a catalyst for enriching not only our marriage, but also our daily lives, making them more enjoyable than they had been in a long time. I thought it would be fun if Richard and Susan got along. Then Susan said, "Let me greet Richard next time." Excited, I invited Susan over to our house and introduced her to Richard. I was so elated at that moment, unaware of the harsh fate that awaited us. Susan began visiting our house frequently, sometimes even when I wasn't home, enjoying lively chats with Richard. I couldn't help but wonder if Richard was getting closer to Susan than to me, as if Susan had taken him from me. I felt a mix of sadness at losing my family and happiness that they were getting along. I hoped the three of us could go out together someday. Today, unusually, Susan wasn't here, and Richard was out, leaving me alone. I planned to bring up the idea when both were around next time. But an event occurred that shattered all those feelings. When Richard returned home, I went to greet him as usual but was met with a shocking scene. Susan and Richard came back arm in arm, looking very intimate. I was stunned and breathless, fearing the worst. I kept telling myself that Susan couldn't do such a thing. Why together? Before I could ask, Susan spoke up. "Richard, I want to live with you." My mind couldn't comprehend what was happening. Susan was smiling triumphantly. Was this woman really the Susan I had thought of as a sister? Huh? Disbelief came before sadness or hatred. I was utterly dumbfounded. To think the person I doted on like a sister could do this. No, perhaps I was the only one who ever thought of us as sisters. Maybe Susan had always intended to take Richard from me. That's why she wanted to meet him, creating a pretext to get closer to him. I had believed Richard would not have another affair, especially not with Susan, which made the shock even more profound. As I stood there dumbfounded, Richard also spoke up. "We don't need the housekeeper, Deborah, anymore," Richard went on passionately. emphasizing how I didn't appeal to him as a woman, praising Susan for her appearance and thoughtfulness, and highlighting all the ways she was attractive. Richard must have grown tired of me and, upon meeting Susan, who was younger and more attractive, chose to have an affair. How irresponsible to have an affair at his age. Affairs are unforgivable at any age, but I never expected one at this stage of our lives. Richard's request to meet Susan was likely not out of interest in my stories, but because he was interested in Susan. Susan is more attractive as a woman than Deborah. Deborah should take a lesson from her. Those words pierced my heart like a knife. A mere housekeeper, lacking in feminine allure. Perhaps that's true. For 40 years, I've supported my family. I had no time for fashion. Busy with all the housework alone, I had no time for myself. Being criticized like this by Richard, whom I had devoted time and effort to out of love, was more than I could bear. Richard had been living with these thoughts all along. I thought he was silent, but still treasured me somewhere deep down. Richard, having aired all his grievances, threw the already signed divorce papers at me and left triumphantly with Susan. Why has it come to this? My sobs echoed in the silent room. A mix of astonishment, anger, hatred, and sadness welled up inside me. Was it my fault? Had I spent more time on self-care, could this have been avoided? I should have divorced sooner. Given he was prone to debts and affairs. He wasn't worth staying with, even out of endurance. If I had divorced when Joseph and Thomas left home, I wouldn't have had to endure this pain. As I slumped down, the ringing of my mobile phone in the dim room broke the silence. It was Joseph. Answering the phone, I sensed something was off with him.
Joseph, what's wrong? You sound strange.
Worried, I asked, and Joseph, with a trembling voice, muttered, "Thomas has died in a motorcycle accident." Thomas dead in an accident? I couldn't believe it, wishing it were a lie. Rushing to the hospital, I found Thomas was already gone. I couldn't accept this reality. The thought of Thomas, who was just fine until recently, suddenly being gone was unbearable. Memories of Thomas flooded back.
Mom, thank you for everything.
I remembered Thomas saying this on Mother's Day, presenting me with carnations. Such memories brought unstoppable tears. Overwhelmed by successive misfortunes, I shakily dialed Richard's number. But Richard didn't answer, no matter how many times I called. All I heard was the ringing, and I barely remember what happened next. Without any contact from Richard, funeral preparations moved forward. As I dealt with Thomas's death, I grew increasingly frustrated, wondering where Richard was and what he was doing. Noticing my agitation, Nancy spoke up with concern.
"Deborah, are you okay?"
"If there's anything you want to talk about, I'm here to listen." I hesitated to burden Nancy with my troubles, but having no one else to turn to, I took her up on her offer. I told her about Susan and Richard, and then about learning of Thomas's death, how misfortunes had piled up one after another. There were moments I couldn't speak through my tears as memories overwhelmed me, but Nancy listened patiently and comforted me until the end, lightening my heart. Upon hearing everything,
"That's unbelievable."
Nancy was visibly angry.
"You've done nothing wrong, Deborah. Richard lacks gratitude for everything you've done for him. It's appalling he would say such things to someone who devoted their life to him."
Seeing Nancy angry on my behalf made me feel a bit more at peace. Talking to Nancy had cleared my mind a bit. I was grateful to have her listen. As I tearfully expressed my gratitude, Nancy quickly comforted me and was eager to help me figure out what to do next. However, Thomas's funeral took precedence. Nancy promised to help me more after the funeral, which went smoothly despite Richard's absence. I couldn't help getting irritated again. thinking Richard was probably unaware of Thomas's death, enjoying his time carelessly with Susan. After calming my anger over the next few days, Nancy came to visit.
Deborah, can you tell me more about what happened? I might be able to help.
Nancy wanted to be of assistance. I detailed how I met Susan and how she got close to Richard. When I mentioned Susan's name, Nancy seemed to ponder deeply. Then, with a look of realization, she asked to check the footage from my home security camera. After a burglary in our neighborhood, Nancy had suggested installing a camera at my entrance when I consulted her. Sure enough, the camera would have recorded Susan's visits. But what would we do with the footage? Curious, I showed Nancy the videos featuring Susan. Upon viewing them, Nancy smiled and said,
"That's great."
Surprised by her unexpected words, I blurted out,
"Huh?"
Caught off guard, I asked Nancy what she meant.
"Actually, Susan was an acquaintance from my college days."
Shocked by this connection, I eagerly asked Nancy for more details. It turns out Susan's bad behavior was well known even back then. She seduced men, regardless of whether they were single or married, and played around with them. It was unclear who her current boyfriend was. In fact,
"I have 3 boyfriends right now,"
Susan boasted. Her casual relationships had likely earned her resentment from several men. Susan also had a reputation for being reckless with money, rumored to have borrowed from past boyfriends. Given that Sandra lived a life of moving in with one boyfriend after another, it's no surprise Susan ended up this way if she grew up watching her. I was half in disbelief, yet somehow, I found myself able to think about it calmly, feeling somewhat relieved. Susan didn't want to be friends with me or took Richard because she fell for him. It was all for money. She had a history of involvement with married men and was probably broke from being sued by a wife. Richard wasted our long-standing bond, deceived by Susan's beauty. Foolish man. I found myself wishing he would take responsibility for his actions. Nancy was aware of Richard's past misdeeds.
"Both Richard and Susan should take responsibility for their actions,"
Nancy said with a sharp, slightly venomous tone. Probably angrier on my behalf than I was. Her kindness felt incredibly warm. After expressing my gratitude again, Nancy smiled shyly. I then filed the divorce papers Richard had thrown at me. By then, my heart had healed enough to go through with it, marking the end of my long marriage. Never did I imagine my marriage ending this way. It was tough. Looking back, it was filled with hardships, but it's over now. Dwelling on the past won't help. I need to focus on the future. Thinking about having my own time felt like a weight was lifted off my shoulders. I later learned that Susan had indeed approached Richard for his money. Our reunion was purely coincidental, but she had plotted to take his money from that moment. I treated her like a sister, but Susan was only interested in money from the start. Learning the truth, I was beyond feeling sad or shocked. Susan had manipulated Richard into buying her designer bags and lied about Sandra needing money for an illness to extort funds from him. Richard, now without income, had given Susan a large sum of money, believing in her, only to be left penniless and eventually disregarded by Susan, despite having divorced from her. Returning home to find it sold, Richard, who had never been good at socializing, found himself without anyone to turn to. While it was tempting to feel pity for his unfortunate situation, considering everything he had done to me, it was clear this was his own doing. Hopefully, this experience would teach Richard a lesson. I ended up moving out of my home to live with Joseph. Initially reluctant to impose, I eventually agreed to live with them. Joseph really married a wonderful person. I'm glad he has such good judgment. I never expected to be treated so kindly by Nancy, feeling as if I gained a daughter. I'm beyond grateful to Nancy and hope to repay her kindness someday. After finishing sorting through Thomas's belongings and everything else had settled, I stood in front of Thomas's grave and reported all that had happened. It's been tough for me, but the accident must have been very hard on you, Thomas. Please watch over us from above. With that prayer, I left Thomas's grave. Finally, everything came to a close. Reflecting on recent events, it's clear there haven't been many good moments. It's been a tumultuous journey. Despite the affairs and the debt that made life difficult, it wasn't all bad. I'm immensely grateful to Nancy for everything she's done. Joseph, unlike me, has a good eye for people. With the changes in our lives, Nancy became pregnant, allowing me to fully enjoy the grandchild I had long hoped for. What a joy it is! The grandchild, bearing resemblance to both Nancy and Joseph, is adorable. I hope they don't grow up like Susan. I wish this family all the happiness in the world, free from such troubles. But with Nancy and Joseph, I'm confident they'll be fine. Their mutual respect and care for each other are evident. Something Richard and I lacked. We were unable to continue valuing each other as we did before marriage. Though I have no plans to remarry, I've learned the importance of cherishing others from Joseph and Nancy. I still have much to learn. With these thoughts, I watched Nancy and her family share joyful laughter.
Well, Mom, how about making sandwiches for us every day until you can get together $30,000? If you don't, I won't let you see Amelia anymore. Such an unreasonable demand from my eldest son turned my life upside down. Before dawn, I was making sandwiches for his family and delivering them, then heading to the care facility. Worn out from fatigue and lack of sleep, I just couldn't bring myself to cut ties with him, all because of my love for my adorable granddaughter, Amelia. But one day, a tearful Amelia revealed a shocking truth her parents had kept hidden. I can't forgive them anymore. I reached my breaking point and decided to fight back. My name is Emma. I am 72 years old. I lost my husband last year and now live alone in our family home. My husband, who was the same age as me, developed dementia in his later years. I took care of him at home for a while, but the last year was spent under the care of a facility. Because of that, I still have a connection to that facility, even after he's gone. I was mentally and physically exhausted from caregiving, and the staff at the facility were truly kind to me. Thanks to them, I believe my husband spent his last year in peace. The facility was always short-staffed and extremely busy. After my husband passed away, I talked to the staff and decided to help out in any small way I could. I've always been good at cooking and baking, so I would make sandwiches and desserts for the staff whenever I went to the facility. Then one day, out of the blue, my eldest son and his family came to visit. It took me by surprise, but I served them tea. Mom, it's been a while. Sorry for barging in like this. We've had some issues and decided to move to this area. James, my eldest son, said, while reaching for the treats on the table. He looked worn out for some reason. Natalie, my daughter-in-law, barely spoke since they arrived and kept fiddling with her cell phone. They decided to move all of a sudden? Did something happen? A faint unease lingered in my heart, but I greeted my granddaughter Amelia with a smile. Amelia, you've grown up so much. How have you been? It must have been about 5 years since I last saw my eldest son's family. Ever since my husband was diagnosed with dementia, my days were consumed with caregiving, leaving no time or energy for anything else. I couldn't even keep up with my adorable Amelia. Granny, it's been a while. I've been good. I'm in the 9th grade now. Oh my, how time flies. You'll be taking exams this year then. You better do your best. Upon hearing this, Amelia's expression turned somber. I wondered, is moving during such a critical period in her education a good idea? Just then, a cat's meow echoed from the kitchen. Amelia whispered with joy, "A cat?" and hurried towards the sound. Mom, since when did you get a cat? No, that little kitty just pops in from time to time. I always leave the back door slightly ajar for her. Sounds risky. James was staring intently towards the kitchen. Natalie didn't lift her face from her smartphone. In Amelia's absence, I probed my son and his wife about the reasons behind their move. Their response was vague, but in essence, they moved hastily due to financial troubles stemming from a failed business venture. I then inquired about James's job. Job? Well, things have been rough. My health's been on the decline, and the doctor advised some rest. More importantly, Mom, I have a favor to ask. James was hoping for a loan. The failed business and move drained their finances, and they were nearly out of money. He needed about $5,000 for daily expenses. Honestly, I hesitated. Even though he's my eldest, lending such a large sum on the spot felt daunting. Are the two of them even thinking about their future? But no matter how much I probed, all I got was, just lend us the money. Despite my reservations, I took out $5,000 from my savings and handed it to James. With a smirk, James quickly pocketed the money. Well, do your best for Amelia's sake. If there's anything I can do to help, just let me know. Yeah, thanks. We're heading out now, but we'll be around often. Please keep some food ready for us. With that, James called Amelia, who was petting the cat in the kitchen, and the three of them left. As I cleared the dishes, a sense of unease about what the future held settled in. Hey Mom, it's me. I'll be coming over tonight. Have dinner and a bath ready, okay? Oh, and I've run out of the money you gave me, so I'll need a bit more. Later. Without waiting for my response, James hangs up the phone. I sigh heavily and set my mobile phone on the table. It's been 2 weeks since my eldest son's family imposed themselves on me. Since then, James has been coming over almost daily for meals and money. On weekends, his adorable daughter Amelia joins. At first, I prepared special meals and lent him a few $1,000s each time, but I've reached my limit. James claimed he couldn't work due to medical reasons, but he looked perfectly healthy to me. I couldn't understand why he was blowing through the large sums I lent him every week. That evening, fed up, I sternly confronted James and his wife when they arrived. I told them I didn't want them visiting so frequently, and to stop asking for food and money. What? You said you'd help, didn't you? Was that a lie? Predictably, James became aggressive in his words and demeanor. His wife, Natalie, silently played with her phone while eating the meal I'd prepared. There are limits, you know. Making me prepare meals every day? Asking for money every week? Enough is enough. I'll go bankrupt at this rate. Fine. I'll give up on the money for now, but instead bring me sandwiches every day. Enough for 3 meals. What? I can't do that. I've told you I volunteer at a facility every weekday morning. Then drop them off before you go. Wake up at 3 a.m. if you have to. Before I could respond, James added, If you don't do anything for us, you won't see Amelia anymore. We'll cut ties with you. Knowing how much I adore my only granddaughter Amelia, James smirked. Honestly, I'd love to cut ties with this couple, but I worry about sweet Amelia. Let me think. I can't come up with money that easily. Then at least gather around $30,000 for now, and remember the sandwiches daily. Let's go, Natalie. From now on, we don't have to come here every day, since Mom will deliver our sandwiches. From that day on, my life dramatically changed. I would wake up before dawn to prepare sandwiches for James's family, deliver them, and then head to the facility. Exhausted and sleep-deprived, my love for Amelia stopped me from cutting ties with my son. This exhausting routine continued for about a month. Then, unexpectedly, Amelia visited alone one weekend. I greeted her with a smile, but she looked somber. To be honest, Dad told me not to visit you anymore. Amelia confessed as she gently stroked our family cat in the kitchen. They make you prepare sandwiches every day while they just laze around at home. I'm so sorry. You don't need to apologize, Amelia. Well, I am a bit worried about those two, but How's the new school? Are you keeping up with your studies? I tried to shift the topic with a cheerful tone, but Amelia remained silent, tears streaming down her face. Caught off guard, I comforted her by rubbing her back. Eventually, she broke down crying even louder. Not understanding the reason, I patiently waited for Amelia to calm down. When she finally stopped crying, she revealed a shocking truth. Amelia hadn't been attending middle school since they moved here. Not just that, she claimed James forced her to lie about her age and work several part-time jobs. All the money she earned went straight into James's pocket. Furthermore, James took away her cell phone when they moved. One night, he suddenly said, "We're moving!" And she was forced onto a truck without even saying goodbye to her friends or teachers. James had forcefully made her promise not to tell me, her grandmother, about all this. I was dumbfounded by the shocking revelations pouring from Amelia's tear-filled eyes. It seemed as if they had moved, secretly, in the dead of night. What could have possibly happened to my eldest son and his wife? That's how it was. Amelia, you've been struggling all this time? I'm sorry I didn't notice earlier. But thank you for telling me. No, I should apologize. I didn't want to upset you. You know, I overheard Dad and Mom talking about you yesterday. They were planning to secretly take some sort of property deed from your place, and then pretend you have dementia to place you in a facility. I just couldn't hold it in anymore. Unable to hold back, Amelia began to cry again. I hugged her tightly. No matter what, I couldn't forgive my eldest son anymore. Until now, I endured everything for dear Amelia's sake, but I've reached my breaking point. James is clearly an adult and a parent himself. He must face the consequences of his actions. I made up my mind silently. Amelia, you don't need to worry. Leave everything to me. Oh, by the way, where are you planning to take your school entrance exams? I smiled at Amelia, trying to encourage her. Amelia, her eyes red from crying, looked a little comforted. Well, I want to go to a place called Winchester Culinary School. With everything going on and lack of money, I might not even be able to apply. Oh, the Winchester Culinary School! I know it. It's a vocational school for cooking and baking, right? The person who founded it was in the same class as your grandfather and me. It's a good school. Really? That's amazing. I love the dishes you make. I want to make people smile with my cooking, just like you. After that, Amelia shared her dreams with me. She told me that despite her tough circumstances, she never gave up and continued studying diligently. I encouraged Amelia and made her promise to continue her studies. After seeing Amelia off, I quickly took action. First, I decided to investigate my eldest son and his wife, so I hired a private investigator. A week later, after receiving the investigation results and pondering them, I made several contacts. Once everything was in order, I called James. I have something substantial to give him. He must bring Natalie and Amelia with him. Thinking he'd finally get his hands on the big bucks, James eagerly agreed to the conditions, deciding to meet at a coffee shop over the weekend. I was seated by the coffee shop's window, engrossed in my phone, when James and his family approached. I set my phone down on the table and exchanged greetings. Hey, give me the money already. Do you want to be cut off from us? Immediately, James reached for the thick brown envelope by my side, filled to the brim. Pulling the envelope closer, I held on to it firmly. If you really want, we can sever ties. But before that, I have some things to confirm with you. Only after that will I hand this over. I began by pointing out that ever since their move, they hadn't enrolled Amelia in middle school and had been making her work illegally on the side. The couple tried to brush it off, clearly eager for the money, but eventually admitted the truth. We had no money, so we had no choice. Once we get the money, she'll quit her job and go back to middle school. Suspicious. With doubt, I continued to question why James wasn't working. Are you truly on medical leave? Which hospital did you go to? Show me some proof, like a receipt or a health insurance card. I don't have any. You're not faking it, are you? Lying just because you don't want to work? As the atmosphere grew tense, James raised his voice. Don't say things like that! I didn't go to any hospital, but something really traumatic happened, and it's been hard. James, can you honestly tell me what happened? If you do, I'll give you this. When I motioned to the envelope in my hand, James begrudgingly began to speak. I get it now. When you said your business failed last time, you were actually betrayed by a business partner, a guy named Alexander. He took off with all the money I worked so hard to earn. He had control over the core know-how and equipment, so I was powerless without him. Oh, that's what happened. I'm the victim here. That's why I couldn't pay the rent and other bills and had to move. Now just give me that money already. With that, James snatches the envelope from my grasp. However, when he quickly opens it, instead of a wad of cash, it's filled with a bunch of bills. James stares blankly at the bills scattered across the table. Why don't you just tell the truth for once? Feeling let down by my eldest son's persistence in lying, I reveal the facts I've gathered. As the business started to profit, he got deep into the sex industry, accumulating massive debt. To cover it, he deceived his business partner, took all the earnings, and even got involved with payday lenders. Then he moved away secretly in the middle of the night. Do you have any idea how hard it was for Amelia? She was thrown into chaos without understanding the reason. She couldn't even say goodbye to her friends and teachers. And you took away her phone? Do you understand how scared and hurt she felt? Whether James was listening or not, he desperately searches the bills, hoping to find money. Watching his pitiable state, I was utterly exasperated. James, hiding from payday lenders and business owners, had neither been working nor notifying the proper authorities of his whereabouts or processing school transfers for Amelia. His wife, Natalie, wasn't working either, so they had no income. It's clear they were counting on me from the beginning. No, I was planning to work once things settled down. What exactly did you do? All you've done is demand money and meals from me and force Amelia to work, right? Natalie is always on her phone, not working at all. Also, I know you've been sneaking into my house while I'm gone. That's breaking and entering. A serious crime, you know. I always leave the back door open for the neighborhood cats. Knowing this, James had been repeatedly breaking into my house whenever I was away. The day Amelia told me about James and Natalie, I remembered I had a pet camera I'd won in a raffle. I fetched it from the storage and set it up. Sure enough, the footage showed James sneaking in from the back door while I was away, rummaging through my cupboards. I've saved the footage on my mobile phone. So, after getting hold of the deeds to my house and land, you planned to make it seem like I'd lost my mind, put me in a facility, and then snatch everything away. You moved here with that intent from the beginning, didn't you? Shut up! You keep making me out to be a criminal. Just because you're my mother, you think you can make baseless accusations? I have a witness right here. Suddenly, an intimidating male voice sounded from behind. James, upon seeing the man, was shocked and jumped. What? Alexander? Why are you... Emma contacted me. I heard there was a discussion today, so I came from far away to participate. Good to see you, James. Looking well, I see. Saying so, Alexander took a seat next to James, effectively blocking his exit. It's my first time meeting him, but Alexander is quite an imposing middle-aged man. I'm surprised James dared to cross someone like him. James, return the money now. There are officers waiting outside. I filed a police report. Pay up or turn yourself in. Decide now. Hearing this from Alexander, James hurriedly looked towards the window. Just as Alexander said, a police car was parked right outside the diner, with an officer standing there, looking our way while on his phone. James looked shocked by the scene, his eyes wide as he instinctively moved back in his seat. Wait, Alexander, I was wrong. I'm truly sorry. I'll pay you back, I promise. I wasn't running away. I just needed a little more time. Just a bit longer, please. Maybe another 2 weeks? So you plan to sneak out in the middle of the night and move again. You think I'd trust the words of someone who's lied to me once? I'll ask one more time. Will you return the $30,000 you stole from me now, or will you go to the officer outside? Which is it? Finally, he'd be arrested. A tangible, profound fear overtook James, sweat forming on his brow. Trembling, James just stared at the table silently for a moment. Eventually, James's bloodshot eyes slowly turned to face me. Hey, Mom, are you okay with this? If I get arrested, Amelia will be the daughter of a criminal. Your meddling has ruined your sweet granddaughter's life. If you don't want that, give me the money. Alexander, I'm sorry to interrupt, but could I borrow your cell phone? Mine isn't working right now. I need to dial this number. Cutting off James's desperate plea, I abruptly addressed Alexander. Ignoring the dumbfounded James, I took the phone that Alexander handed over willingly and dialed a number. Switching the call to speaker mode, I placed the phone on the table. Amelia, I'm calling the dean of the Winchester Culinary School. I've already briefed him about your situation. Please, have a chat with him. Amelia was visibly flustered. What? Shortly, the call connected, and a flustered Amelia picked up the phone. A deep, calm male voice came through from the other end. Hello, this is William. Oh, hi! My name's Amelia. I love my grandmother's cooking. And I want to be able to make dishes that bring joy to people too. I want to join the Winchester Culinary School. It was a call with the dean of the prestigious Winchester Culinary School. Amelia, filled with nervous excitement, tried her best to convey her feelings. Dean William listened intently, occasionally nodding and giving encouraging murmurs. I see. Thank you for sharing, Amelia. It seems you've been through a lot. Your grandmother Emma is an old friend of mine. I'm aware of the situation. Amelia, once so excited, suddenly went silent. That's right, she had no hope for exams or the future. Like a deflating balloon, her shoulders slumped in disappointment. But you know, that doesn't matter. You have dreams and you're working hard towards them. You've honored our Winchester Culinary School by choosing it as your first step. We give everyone an equal chance and support all students, no matter their background. Come, take the test with integrity. We'll be waiting. The call ended. I thanked him and handed the mobile phone back to Alexander. Yes, Amelia will be fine now. I can turn myself in without any worries. James's face went blank, and he froze. For those who might not know, the Winchester Culinary School is where Amelia wants to study. It's a professional cooking school. Despite the challenges from her clueless parents, nothing will hold her back. Amelia looked at her father. Her cheeks were still flushed from the tension of the call, but her eyes sparkled. James looked deflated, avoiding eye contact, clearly embarrassed. Prompted by Alexander, James exited the diner. The officer put away his phone and started talking to James. It's disheartening to see your child in police custody, but I want James to take full responsibility for his actions. I picked up the mobile phone left on the table. I had previously consulted with the officer and had him on the line during our conversation. With everything recorded, even James can't escape this time. And one more thing. I turned to Natalie. Throughout the confrontation with James, she seemed disinterested, constantly fiddling with her phone. Natalie, James is with the officer. What will you do? She only briefly met my gaze. Huh? I don't care about that man. I'm divorcing him soon anyway. Amelia looked shocked and turned to her mother. Wait, what about Amelia? Your marital issues are yours, but you need to consider Amelia. I've made up my mind about what I want. I'm tired of his wasteful spending. I just want to live on my terms now. Tears quickly filled Amelia's eyes. With a father like James and now her mother, how much more hurt would they inflict on their daughter? I felt more disheartened than angry and sighed deeply. Later, a resigned James confessed all his crimes at the police station and is still being interrogated. He owed $50,000 from the sex industry, took $30,000 from his former business partner Alexander, and borrowed $20,000 from payday lenders. The total amount he siphoned from me was around $20,000. Of course, both Alexander and I intend to claim every penny. As his mother, it's heartbreaking. I hope this serves as a lesson for him to deeply reflect and atone for his sins. Natalie, being James's ex-wife, was also interrogated. During this, it was discovered she had been scammed. This was a romance scam, where you get sweet-talked by someone you meet on social media, and after establishing a romantic relationship, they skillfully swindle large amounts of money. The person Natalie had been communicating with on her mobile phone claimed to be a super famous, handsome actor. One day, she received a personal direct message just for her and was passionately pursued. Natalie fell head over heels. She kept sending money, doing whatever he asked. Of course, this was an imposter, pretending to be the actor. This case mirrored numerous others reported to the police. Realizing she'd been deceived, Natalie was utterly devastated. Since she had already divorced James, she had no one to turn to and had lost her means of livelihood. After that, I decided to live with Amelia. I sold my house and land and moved to an apartment near Winchester Culinary School. The house and land, located in a prime urban area, had a huge asset value, fetching me several $1,000,000. I made sure that Amelia would be the beneficiary of these assets, so she'd never face financial hardships. We moved in the middle of the night, as if sneaking away. My parents were deeply distressed, with everything escalating to the police, but Amelia never gave up and continued to work hard. I, too, did everything I could, managing her transfer to middle school and helping with her exams. Thanks to our efforts, Amelia managed to take the entrance exam for Winchester Culinary School and got in. Just as Principal Williams said, Amelia dedicates herself to her studies at Winchester Culinary School, heading straight towards her dream, enjoying her youthful days surrounded by friends. Watching my beloved Amelia grow up by my side, I live with peace in my heart, basking in happiness.
Seriously, you're such a fool. How can anyone be as inept as you? Fool, inept. How many times had such cruel words been hurled at me? I had vowed my eternal love to him, truly believing that we could find happiness together. That was the idea, at least, when we got married. But when I came to my senses, the so-called love had vanished somewhere. My husband's domineering attitude escalated day by day, to the point where even the care of my mother-in-law was forced upon me. Physically and emotionally, I was on the brink. If things kept going this way, I would lose my sanity. However, God did not abandon me. The person who reached out to me, teetering on the edge of despair, was none other than my mother-in-law, whom I was taking care of. My name is Mary Wagner, 30 years old. After graduating from university, I worked in a publishing company. I quit my job at the time of marriage, and now I'm a full-time housewife. My friends say they envy me. How lucky you are to be a housewife. Your husband must be earning well, they say. But my married life isn't all that happy. In fact, it might be closer to hell. The cause of this was my husband, Jack. We met through work and got married after 2 years of dating. Jack, 3 years older than me, had a slightly cool side to him, and we weren't exactly the lovey-dovey couple. Still, I loved him for his solid self-identity and mature composure. I thought we could live a peaceful, happy life together. That was my expectation. But the moment we became a married couple, his attitude completely changed. Jack, to put it plainly, was a patriarch. I realized this a few days after our marriage. I, who had listened to his desire for me to become a full-time housewife, began to devote myself to household chores from the day after our marriage. That day, too, I had made dinner in time for Jack's return and was waiting for him. Jack comes home a little past 7 p.m. He then, looking at the dinner on the table, suddenly raised his voice. "Hey, what's this meal?" "Huh? It's a gratin and salad, plus a pottage soup." "Don't mess with me. If you're going to prepare a meal for your tired husband, it should be a full-course meal." I'm sorry. The last time you said it was delicious, so..." "That's not an excuse. Why can't you even do such simple things? You're really over as a woman. You're just too incompetent." You don't have to say it like that," I mutter with a bit of a troubled expression, and Jack glares at me. Then suddenly he threw the salad-filled dish onto the floor. At this unexpected act, a scream-like voice slipped out. "Oh, what are you doing?" "Huh? It's because you, as a wife, can't even do the bare minimum, right? That's why I made it clear to you." "You don't have to disrespect the food like that." "Shut up. If you have time to make excuses, use your deficient brain to think more about how to become suitable as my wife, you fool." Fool? I'd been called that for the first time in my life. Sure, I've been scolded by my parents, and I've argued with my brother and friends, but I've never been subjected to such cruel words. More so, being told such things by the husband I love. It was only a few days since our marriage. I never imagined that he would throw the food on the floor just because he didn't like the dinner menu. That being said, I'm a housewife, and I'll continue to be dependent on him for our livelihood. I can't go against my husband. As a newlywed, the last thing I wanted to do was upset my husband. Since that day, I've been treading on eggshells around him. I'm extremely cautious not to step on his landmines. Every piece of laundry must be ironed meticulously. The loaded potato soup should be simple, and the seasoning of the side dishes should be well seasoned. Cleaning, even a single strand of hair on the floor, is not allowed. Living under such pressure, my nerves gradually wore thin. But without regard to me, his patriarchal dominance continued to escalate. "Hey, this shirt has a crease left in the sleeve. Don't you have eyes?" I'm sorry. I'll iron it right away." "I'm leaving for work now, you know. You're always so slow."
"I'll do it right away."
"You won't have time for that. Damn, you're so annoying first thing in the morning. How much more do you need to upset me to be satisfied, you incompetent woman?"
I'm sorry. Really sorry." Whenever I made a mistake, I immediately bowed my head in apology. This was also something ordered by my husband. Depending on the severity of the mistake, the level of my apology changes. This time, I was forgiven just by bowing, but when it's really bad, I have to kneel down in apology. When my mistakes continue, he sometimes even pointedly presents me with a filled-out divorce document. It's scary how you get used to things,
And if you keep living like this for a year, you start to feel like you're absolutely worthless. But I can't divorce him, not in my current jobless state. I can't tell my parents, who were so happy for our marriage, that I got divorced. Especially not in such a short time span. The thought of continuing to be scolded by my husband forever filled me with despair for my future. As always, I was preparing dinner this day and waiting for him to come home. My daily routine is to finish cooking before 7 p.m. and have everything ready for him to eat at any time. As soon as the front door opens, I start laying out the food. If I don't finish by the time he sits down, I'll be forced to apologize again. My husband usually takes his seat in silence, but for some reason, this day was different. As he loosened his tie, he started a conversation with me. "Mary, we're moving to my parents' house this weekend." "Huh? Your parents' house? You mean your mom's place?" "Yeah, that's right. Have all our stuff packed by then." "Why all of a sudden? Jack, you've always said that you didn't want to go back to your parents' house." In response to my probing question, his cold gaze pierced me. I instinctively shut my mouth, and after a pause, he opened his. "My mother fell, and it's hard for her to live on her own now." "What? Then we should go there right away." "She's been hospitalized for a week. We're moving when she gets discharged this weekend." "And I see that's what happened. But why all of a sudden? You were so against going back to your parents' house." "You can guess why, can't you? Because I can inherit wealth." "Wealth?" As if he was delighted by his mother's situation, he continued the conversation. "Listen, my father was just an ordinary guy, but my mother's family is rich, so she has a decent amount of money." "What does that have to do with what happened this time?" "If I act dedicated during this time, I might be able to get a hefty inheritance, right? If we, as a couple, rush over, I'm sure she'll give us the whole inheritance." "For such a reason? Isn't that a bit disrespectful?" "Shut up. You're being supported by me, so just listen quietly." I'm sorry." Being yelled at loudly, I instinctively apologized as usual. In front of my downcast self, he proclaimed with a triumphant look, "Listen, you're the one who's going to take care of my mom. From now on, you're going to work as my maid at my parents' house for the rest of your life." "Maid? You mean like that?" "Don't talk back. Who do you think is providing for your current lifestyle?" "It's thanks to Jack." "Right. Depending on how seriously you take care of my mother, the amount of inheritance we can get will change. So don't slack off in the care, understand?" Urged to reply by him, I responded softly, "Yes." Seeing my obedience, he showed a satisfied smile before starting his dinner. Forcing me to care for his mother just for her inheritance? He doesn't think of me as his wife at all. To him, I'm just a housemaid. Although I knew this, being told so directly was quite a shock to me. Even so, I didn't have the courage to talk back. I was, in a sense, brainwashed, having erased my own possibilities. The next day, as per my husband's command, I began packing our belongings. We moved to my mother-in-law's place a week later to coincide with her discharge from the hospital. On the day of her discharge, Jack didn't come to the hospital, using work as an excuse. So I was the one accompanying my mother-in-law. On the way back from the hospital, my mother-in-law opened her mouth in apology. "Mary, I'm really sorry. Because of me, you're going through all this." "No, don't worry about it. I'm a housewife, and if I can support you while staying at home, then there's nothing better than that. Thank you, but aren't you bothered by how sudden this was? Well, packing was a bit rushed, I guess. I bet it was. Even I was surprised. Jack moving in with us? I wonder why he decided to do this all of a sudden. Mary, did you hear anything? No, I didn't. It's understandable that my mother-in-law would find it strange. Jack has always disliked her, often saying things like, "She's a pain," and "I don't want to see her." Despite this, he moved in with her as soon as she was hospitalized, aiming for her inheritance. To be honest, I was taken aback by Jack's transformation. However, I couldn't tell my mother-in-law the truth. Trying not to give anything away, I pretended to be calm. From this day on, my life as a caregiver began. Adapting to the unfamiliar role of a caregiver, along with the housework in the large single-family home. Even returning to his parents' home didn't change Jack's domineering nature, and I was verbally abused almost daily when my mother-in-law wasn't around. I wasn't allowed to skimp on housework or caregiving, and my days were filled with constant activity from morning till night. This went on for about a month, until one day, as I was wiping my mother-in-law's body, she voiced her concern. "Mary, have you lost weight again?" No, don't worry about it, Mother." "Are you sure? I thought the same when you moved in. You looked a lot more worn out than when you first got married." She was right. Over the past 1.5 years of married life, I've lost 15 pounds. It's not that I've been skipping meals, but my appetite has certainly decreased. More than that, I don't have time to eat leisurely. My mother-in-law noticed the changes in me that even Jack hadn't. Just that fact alone made me feel a little less lonely. Not wanting to worry my mother-in-law, I forced a smile. "Don't worry about me, Mother. Just being able to have these nice chats with you every day makes me happy." "Mary, let's stop this gloomy talk. Should I wipe your other hand, Mother?" Yes, please." Then my phone suddenly rang. "Oh, it looks like it's Jack." At my mother-in-law's words, my body tensed. Jack had ordered me to answer his calls immediately. However, as I was holding a wet towel, I couldn't answer right away. But I knew if I didn't respond promptly, Jack would be furious again. Using my elbow, I managed to hit the answer button and switch the call to speaker. "Hello?" I replied. The moment I answered, a loud, angry voice came from the other end of the line. "Hey, don't mess around!" it shouted. "Why didn't you answer immediately?" I'm sorry, I was a bit occupied." "What? A maid should answer at the first ring." "But I was in the middle of something and couldn't." "Didn't I always tell you not to talk back? You're so annoying. Why are you so incompetent?" I'm sorry." "You're taking proper care of the old lady, right? The amount of inheritance depends on how well you do your job. Do you get that?" Being berated in front of my mother-in-law brought a rush of shame. He repeatedly insulted me, calling me incompetent and annoying, and then abruptly hung up the phone. After Jack's call ended, a heavy silence filled the room. It was broken by none other than my mother-in-law. "Mary, that was Jack, right? Does he always talk to you like that?" Yes, but it's my fault. I am incompetent." "What are you saying? You're such a kind and good girl." "Mom." "I can't overlook this, Mary. It's time to get back at him." "Huh?" My mother-in-law then suggested a plan. Following her instructions, I threw all of Jack's belongings into the yard and locked the front door. Together we waited for Jack to come home. A few hours later, we could hear rattling noises from the entrance. It must have been Jack, but of course the locked door wouldn't open. Despite the intercom ringing, I ignored it just as my mother-in-law had instructed. Finally, my phone started ringing. It was Jack. I switched the call to speaker and answered. "Hello?" He started off shouting immediately. "Hey, don't mess around. Open the front door right now." "I can't do that." "What? What are you saying?" "This is at the order of your mother." "What?" Unable to comprehend, he repeatedly shouted, "Don't mess around," and "Open it now." To him, my mother-in-law let out a cold voice. "The one messing around is you, you fool." Mom? I always knew you were cold, but I never thought you'd treat your wife like this. No, that's not. I knew something was off when you suddenly moved in. To use your wife and rely on inheritance. How can you live such a shameful life? No, that's not true. What's not true? I have no intention of leaving you any inheritance. If you understand, get lost. This is my house. You will never be allowed back in. Flustered by my mother-in-law's words, Jack began pounding on the door. Through the phone, I could hear him begging, "Please, do something!" I have an ally, my mother-in-law. I won't be brainwashed any longer. With resolution, I said firmly to Jack on the phone, "I want a divorce. I can't go on with you anymore." What? What are you saying? Shut up. I'm done being married to a man like you. I don't waste my life anymore. I won't give up on my own life. I've decided to carve out my own happiness. Don't joke around. You can't live without me. There's nothing I can't do. No matter how tough it gets, it's better than being with you. I will overcome anything. I will no longer need you in my life. I refuse to have a trash like you. I abruptly hung up the phone and blocked his contact. His yelling could be heard from outside, but it eventually changed to cries of despair. My mother-in-law reported this to the police. For his nuisance behavior, he was taken away by officers. I used the divorce papers he had given me before to formally divorce him. On top of that, I sued him for compensation through a lawyer for mental and physical distress. With the witness of my mother-in-law, the proceedings went smoothly. After paying the lump sum compensation to me, Jack's savings were exhausted. In addition, he lost his position at his company after they found out about his police records, and he was reduced to an ordinary employee. Naturally, my mother-in-law refused to pass down her inheritance to Jack. After a discussion with the lawyer, in accordance with my mother-in-law's wish to leave everything to me, it was decided that she would transfer me about $1 million per year. I continue to care for my mother-in-law at her house. It's about the only thing I can do for her now. Mary, I'm so sorry for always troubling you. Even after divorcing Jack, you're still taking care of me. Why are you saying that, Mom? I should be the one thanking you. Really, I'm so fortunate to have a daughter like you. Same here. Let's keep supporting each other, okay? My life with my mother-in-law is filled with more smiles than I could have imagined. I'll do my best to do what I can for her until the end of her life.
My name is Mary, and I'm getting close to my late 50s this year. I have 2 children. My elder son has become a working adult and is planning to get married to his girlfriend soon. My eldest daughter is currently a college student, and though she seems to be working hard every day, She appears to be thoroughly enjoying her university life. With my children growing up, I've almost finished my duties as a mother, and being a former nurse, I'm considering returning to the caregiving profession. One day, I got the shocking news that my father-in-law, Bob, had suffered a stroke. I received a call from my husband, John, and rushed to the hospital where Bob was admitted. Bob has always been a very earnest man, gentle, and has been very kind to me, his daughter-in-law. However, I have been worried because he hasn't been in good spirits since his wife, Alice, passed away 3 years ago. I occasionally visited his house to check on him and noticed a clear lack of energy, so we had been frequently inviting him out with the kids. Amidst this, when I had just begun to notice a return of vitality to Bob, the news of his stroke filled me with unease. When I arrived at the hospital, Bob's daughter and her husband were there, engaged in some conversation. "Sorry I'm late. How's Bob doing?" I asked, catching my breath as I approached John's sister, Isabella. Isabella sighed in irritation when she noticed me and said, "You're late. We have somewhere to be, so can you take it from here?" With that, she left briskly. Isabella has always seemed indifferent to Bob, often treating him coldly. Not only Bob, but she was the same with Alice when she was alive. Bob and Alice were such kind people, and they never said anything to her. But I think that's what made her what she is now. For now, I paced around the waiting area nervously while Bob was presumably in surgery. In the meantime, John arrived at the hospital.
"Mary, how's Dad?"
John was obviously worried. Sweat dripped from his forehead, and his dress shirt was soaked with perspiration. When I shook my head, John dropped the bags he was carrying, his face pale.
No way."
I quickly corrected him. "No, he's still in surgery. We don't know yet." John seemed to relax a bit, picking up his fallen bags and sinking into a chair.
"Should we prepare ourselves?"
I rushed over to John, who looked on the verge of tears, and put my hand on his back. "No, it's going to be okay." I felt helpless, not being able to say anything else, but I couldn't think of anything else to say. A few hours later, the surgery ended, and we were told by the doctor to come into a small room for an explanation.
"The surgery was successful. However, he will most likely have some lasting effects."
In other words, we were told Bob would need care. While I do hope for Bob's wellness, if it comes to providing care, this also involves Isabella and her husband. John and I decided to call Isabella to discuss this. As a result, we agreed to talk things out and arranged a meeting at Bob's house while he was still in the hospital. "I'm not going to look after him," Isabella announced as soon as the discussion started, shocking John and me.
"Wait, if you're not going to, what are we supposed to do?"
"I don't care. You two can take care of him," my sister-in-law Isabella said, idly fiddling with her neatly decorated nails that were done somewhere. Her husband, Tom, nodded in agreement. "What about a nursing home?" "What on earth are you talking about? I don't intend to waste money." This is what happens whenever I step in. Isabella glares at me with a look of the devil on her face. It feels like I'm not allowed to voice an opinion, so I shut my mouth.
"If he can't go to a facility, and you girls won't look after him, then what are we going to do?"
"That's why you guys should take care of him. I don't need some decrepit poverty god in my house." Isabella giggles as she speaks. Even I, normally patient, lost my cool at that. "That's too much, even for you. He's your father." "I don't care. Why is it that just because he's my father, I have to be the one to look after him? Besides, he's John's father too. I've been saying you guys should look after him." There's nothing I can say to that. If we could take care of him at home, I would love to. But our house isn't fully accessible. There are many steps and level differences. If we were to take in my father-in-law, we'd have to remodel our house, and we don't have enough funds for that. Mary, don't you have a care worker certification? Taking care of Dad should be easy, right? I was at a loss for words at Isabella's smug face. John, too, seemed to feel the same, and we decided to take the issue home for the time being, leaving our in-laws' house behind.
What should we do? Mary, you were thinking about going back to your care work.
That's okay. I wasn't absolutely set on going back, so don't worry about it, I gently said to a troubled John. The issue is the money. I don't mind taking in your father, but if we do, we'll need to make this house accessible so he won't fall, and medical equipment isn't cheap.
You're right.
I wonder if it'll cost about $100,000. That's just a rough estimate, but if we think about adjusting the entire first floor for him to live on, that's about how much it'd cost. Our eldest daughter is still in college, so we don't have that much money. We still have a mortgage on the house, and the thought of adding a loan for renovations is daunting.
I feel terrible about this, but should we ask him to go to a facility?
The question is, can we even get him in one? The waiting lists are long, and the costs aren't negligible. I'm sure Isabella and her family won't help. There seems to be no solution in sight. We decided to at least hear out my father-in-law's opinion, and I alone went to the hospital where he was hospitalized. Upon entering his room, I found my father-in-law had recovered considerably and greeted me with a smile.
Sorry for all the trouble.
Every time I visited, my father-in-law would say something like this. Why would you say that? Now, I've brought you one of your favorite books today. According to the doctor, my father-in-law suffered a stroke on one side of his body and could no longer move the right half of his body on his own. Because of this, when reading a book, he would place it on the table and use something heavy to keep the pages from turning on their own.
Ah, thank you.
My father-in-law took the book I had brought and placed it by his pillow. Dad, I came today because I wanted to talk about something. It's about what's to come. At this, my father-in-law smiled warmly.
Oh, I know. I'll be okay, even in a nursing home. I have saved up for it, so you don't have to worry.
Despite his words, I could see a hint of loneliness in his expression. Well, Dad, if you're okay with it, why not come to our house? I've worked in elderly care before, and I'm a stay-at-home mom, so I have time. And John's there, too. That's right. Let's live together. I blurted out the words, seeing his lonely expression. My father-in-law looked at me in surprise.
That's a kind offer.
He must have felt it somewhere within him, that he couldn't go back to his own house anymore. His own house, where his daughter Isabella and her husband are living. And I can see them treating him as an inconvenience if he were to return, ultimately leading him to a nursing home. Thinking this, I felt a pang of sadness. I had initially planned to listen to my father-in-law's feelings and proceed with the conversation accordingly, but I got ahead of myself. I felt somewhat guilty towards my husband, John, but I knew he would understand. Now, all that was left was to somehow arrange for his aftercare before his discharge. The problem was the cost. I decided to consult Isabella once. With these thoughts, I headed home. When John came back from work and I told him what had happened at the hospital, he looked a bit troubled, but agreed as if he had known it would come to this. John called Isabella right there.
That's why we're asking for your help, because we're the ones who are going to be looking after Dad.
It seemed like John and Isabella were arguing over the phone, and John's tone was getting a little harsh. With a sigh, he hung up the phone. John explained his conversation with Isabella. It seemed she was refusing to give any money, and there was nothing we could do about it. For the sake of my father-in-law, John began to discuss how we could handle the costs. After that, our house got a bit noisy. We discussed how to renovate the house and what kind of care supplies we'd need, and received various explanations about home care. When I told my father-in-law that he would be living with us after he was discharged, he looked apologetic, but also pleased.
Mary, could you get the checkbook that's over there?
My recovered father-in-law pointed at a cloth bag on the shelf during one of our visits. Wondering what he'd use a checkbook for, I did as he asked and took it out. Watching my father-in-law, I saw him open the bank book and show it to me. I have some money here. Can you and John use it? The checkbook he showed me had an amount written in it that I had never seen before. When I froze seeing this, my father-in-law laughed and said, "You and John will be taking care of me from now on, right? I heard about you getting a new car and making the house accessible. Would $10 million be enough for that?" $10 million? I hadn't counted the zeros, but I was shocked at the number of $10 million. I had no idea why my father-in-law had saved so much money, but apparently after my mother-in-law passed away, he didn't feel like doing anything and decided to venture into the investments he had been studying for a while. It seems to have worked out better than expected, and his savings began to accumulate quickly. He was not a big spender, so he only kept on saving. However, even if he wanted to remodel the house or buy a new car, it shouldn't cost that much. I handed his bank book back to him and said, I can't accept this much. Please use this for yourself." He, in turn, offered the bank book back to me, saying, "I can't use all this money. I would rather give it back to you and your family, who are willing to take care of me." Stuck with the predicament of the returned bank book again, I refused. "Still, I can't accept so much." My father-in-law, after contemplating for a while with a troubled look, proposed, "What about $1 million?" Seeing no end to this, I managed to persuade him to agree to a reduced sum of $100,000. He still seemed dissatisfied, but for the moment that was good. As such an exchange was going on, "I'm here!" Isabella appeared out of nowhere. With the entrance of Isabella, who was oblivious to money matters, I hurriedly shoved my father-in-law's bank book back into its original place. Seeing this, my sister-in-law Isabella frowned and asked, "What's going on?" with a hint of worry in her voice. I was relieved that she hadn't heard our previous conversation. Isabella had come to bring some clothes for our father. After chatting for a bit, we both left the hospital room, but on our way home, Isabella suddenly said that she had something to discuss and suggested we stop by a coffee shop. Her talks have never been about anything good in the past, so I assumed this wouldn't be any different. I reluctantly agreed, but it turned out to be a mistake. "I will take care of Dad." "What?" At the sudden proposal, I was taken aback. Despite her words, we're already in the middle of preparations to accommodate my father-in-law, even starting renovations on the house. I couldn't help but wonder why she would suddenly propose such a thing. "So, you don't have to visit the hospital from tomorrow?" "No, visiting has nothing to do with it. There's no rule stating that only the caretaker should visit, so why would she say such a thing?" Although I had doubts about Isabella's statement, I suggested we discuss it at another time and left the cafe. When I told my husband John about this at home, he pondered over it and suddenly seemed to connect the dots.
She must have overheard about the savings.
Although I had a hunch about it, it seems that was the case. John said,
Otherwise, there's no way she would accept the caretaking, especially considering she was so opposed to it until recently.
I had vaguely suspected that she had found out about the money and was trying to curry favor to inherit all of it. She might even come up with some excuse to start spending it. "But what should we do?" I asked.
"I have an idea. Let's let her take a shot,"
said John, with a sly grin on his face, indicating he was up to something. Feeling uneasy about his plan, I decided to keep quiet and follow Isabella's request for now. I had conveyed to my father-in-law that he wouldn't need to worry about money and that his daughter Isabella would be providing care. His response was ambiguous, a vague expression not quite affirming or denying his understanding, and with that, the conversation ended. Afterward, he was safely discharged from the hospital and returned to his family home in Nebraska where Isabella resided. When my father-in-law was discharged, I had the chance to inspect the family home. The state of the house was unclear. There was no renovation, and it was questionable whether there were enough caregiving supplies. I doubted if real caregiving could happen in such conditions. However, this was Isabella's choice. I felt it was not my place to comment, so I decided to keep quiet. 2 months later, I got a call from Isabella.
Mary, I can't do this anymore. Please come over right now.
She sounded frantic over the phone, so I responded and hurried over to the house in Nebraska. When I arrived, the house was messy and there was a disgusting odor in the air. As I was wondering what happened, Isabella appeared, looking more disheveled than ever. She had dark circles under her eyes, and her walk was unsteady. "Are you okay?" I rushed over to Isabella, clearly in a bad state. Isabella grabbed my hand and said, "Take Dad away." At first, I didn't understand what she meant, but after calming her down and getting her to explain, it seemed she had underestimated the challenges of caregiving. The duties extended from assistance with walking and meals to dealing with incontinence, which also meant dealing with diapers. It was overwhelming for her, not being able to handle anything around the house or even look at herself. I told her I couldn't make any decisions right then and promised to contact her as soon as possible. I took this matter home with me.
"It lasted 2 months. That's impressive."
My husband John muttered as he glanced at the calendar. Apparently he had seen this coming. He proposed we go and pick up my father-in-law on his next day off, and I agreed. A few days later, when we arrived at the family home in Nebraska, my father-in-law was already packed and ready to leave. I felt relieved that I could finally take him home.
"I've endured for 2 months, and I used to live here too, so I deserve at least $5 million,
Isabella said out of the blue as we were about to help my father-in-law into the car. I was so startled that I stopped in my tracks. John, too, was taken aback and turned to look at Isabella. Unfazed, she had a smug expression on her face.
"What are you talking about, Isabella? This is not the time or place to talk about money, especially in front of Dad. He raised us after all."
John tried to reason with her, but it seemed to have no effect.
"I'm his daughter. It's only fair that I get paid."
Her defiant response surprised me. How could she be so brazen? I questioned Isabella's personality.
"Enough, Isabella. You shouldn't be talking about such unsavory matters. And besides, you've already received money," my father-in-law injected with a disbelieving expression.
"There's none left. Just $5 million. What's so hard about that? If you're just going to wither away, you might as well put it to good use."
"Sis!"
I was taken aback. To think she would dare to speak in such a manner to her own father. I stood frozen in surprise. Even my usually composed husband, John, seemed to be seething at Isabella's words, his face turning beet red as he glared at her.
"John, it's okay. She's speaking the truth."
In an attempt to soothe his riled-up son, Bob, my father-in-law, gently reassured him and then turned to Isabella with a stern expression.
"Isabella, you are no longer my child. Leave this house."
His words were icy, to the point. Upon hearing this, Isabella froze in shock. "What? What are you talking about? I'm your only daughter."
"I only have a son, and this kind and caring woman here is my daughter-in-law. I don't know you any more. Take your foolish husband and leave."
Having only heard the soft-spoken side of my father-in-law, Bob, I was astonished at the harsh tone now. Looking at Bob, his eyes were hardened, not permitting any defiance. It seemed as though that the message was being conveyed. Even Isabella was silenced by his dominance.
"Well then, shall we go? We're counting on you moving forward."
It was as if the face from earlier had disappeared. Bob was back to his usual self, and he smiled at me. John and I had no choice but to follow his words. We drove back home, leaving a stunned Isabella standing in place. Apparently, Bob later arranged through his lawyer for a last will and testament, stating that the inheritance would go only to John, and ensuring that no portion of it would end up with Isabella. Though the house became vacant with Isabella's departure, John and I wanted to live there, and Bob was happy to oblige. Isabella and her husband moved out and into an apartment, and it seemed that they had been using a significant amount of Bob's money even when he was in good health. Their spendthrift habits led them into debt, and now they're struggling to pay it back. Every day I can't help but think that this is the inevitable outcome for someone like Isabella, who can't respect or repay her parent even if he's her biological father. While caring for Bob is indeed tough, as a person who has been in the caregiving profession, it doesn't feel like a burden to me, and we're able to maintain a good relationship.
From childhood, I was raised and cherished by my grandparents. In a minor accident, my beloved grandmother passed away. During that time, out of the blue, I received a message from my long unheard from sister-in-law. The message read, "I need you to take care of your grandmother who passed away 3 months ago." There is so much I wanted to say, but my cherished grandmother is not there anymore. I witnessed it with my own eyes. This call would serve as a catalyst for everything to come to light. I am Linda Thompson, a 45-year-old single woman. The last time I had a significant male presence in my life was back in college. After parting with him, I dove headfirst into the working world post-graduation, laboring in the marketing department of a major cosmetics company, where I worked overtime and weekends as the norm. Before I knew it, I had missed my chance to get married. That's not the reason, but 6 years ago, I changed careers and took a desk job at a nursing home. I used to commute for an hour and a half one way on crowded trains, and if I made it back home on the last train, I considered myself lucky. Now, I work at a place less than a 10-minute bike ride away from home. I get the usual days off as per the calendar, and overtime is almost non-existent. But that's not why I changed jobs either. I've never moved out of my childhood home. I'm confident in my financial standing, and I'm pretty good at household chores, if I do say so myself. So, why haven't I moved out? Because I love my family, especially my dear grandmother. I was born and raised in California. The members of my family are my parents, grandparents, and my brother, who is 5 years my senior. His name is Brian Thompson, now 50 years old. While I just said I love my family, my feelings toward my brother are complex. I used to love him as my brother. He was a gentle and caring older brother, always looking after his little sister. But Brian changed. After graduating from college, he got a job in car sales, moved out on his own early on, and married a woman from his workplace just 2 years later. From then on, we gradually grew apart, and he never shows up at our childhood home. Not during Thanksgiving, not during spring break, not even during the Christmas holidays. I vaguely know that he lives somewhere in the South, but that's about it. I don't even know if he has children. I can't even remember when I last saw Brian's face, or when we last spoke on the phone. It feels like it's been at least 5 years. Ever since I became a manager, I've been super busy. I'm leaving everything home related to you. Those are the last words I remember from Brian. My current impression of him can be summarized as, what an unfeeling man. That's why I made a career change and decided to not move away from my childhood home, to protect the house. My parents are both retired. My grandfather, 93 years old, suffered a stroke a few years ago, and though he recovered, he requires constant care and can't live independently. Currently, my parents are taking care of him. And then, there's my grandmother, Betty Thompson, aged 92. My dearly beloved Grandma Betty. In our house, both of my parents were working, so it was my grandparents who took care of my siblings and me when we were little. Especially Grandma Betty. She taught me everything I needed to survive. These days, she can't get out much, but she's lively enough to walk around the house freely. That's why I decided to change my job and working in a nursing home so that I can take care of her if anything happens. On one particular day, "I'm off to work," I said as I was getting ready to leave the house, when Grandma Betty called from behind me. "Lynn, you forgot something!" "Huh? I didn't forget anything," I replied, but she said, "Here, have some hard candies," and handed me a few black licorice candies. "Oh, right, thanks." That brought a smile to my face. Licorice has always been a favorite of both Grandma Betty's and mine. I put them in my suit pocket and left the house with a smile. Suddenly, tragedy struck. Or maybe it's called a tragedy because it happened suddenly, but that doesn't matter now. Grandma Betty had a severe accident. According to my father, after she had hung her laundry on the balcony upstairs as usual, she missed a step on the stairs and fell. It was something we always feared. We always told her to leave the laundry to Mom and Dad, that the stairs were dangerous and not to go upstairs. But Grandma Betty, like me, was stubborn. She was a believer in doing what she can do by herself. No one is to blame. It was just an unfortunate accident that could have happened at any time. Everything happened quickly after that. Grandma Betty, who had suffered complex fractures to her femur and pelvis, never made it home from the hospital. Just 4 months later, she passed away due to old age. Of course, I was sad, and I did cry. I cried and broke down crying, but I am an adult now, and now I am the breadwinner of this house. I don't have time to wallow in sorrow. Funeral, cremation, interment, I have to take care of everything. Grandma Betty was originally from the Midwest, and now we don't have any close relatives to contact. We decided at a family meeting to have a funeral only with close family members. We have to invite my brother and his wife. I thought they would come without hesitation, but I was wrong. I couldn't reach them by phone or WhatsApp. I also sent an email, but no reply. I sent a text message as a last resort, and the reply came on the day of the cremation. I'm very busy overseas for work. Sorry, but I can't make it. I'll send the money later, it said. I don't care about the money! Upon seeing the message, I found myself speaking out loud unintentionally. Could his job really be so important that he can't even make time to say goodbye to our grandma who adored us so much? It's hard to accept. Into Grandma's casket, her makeup impeccably done, looking like she was just peacefully sleeping, were placed flowers and a photo of Grandpa, along with her favorite black candy. Something changed in my perception of my brother while doing this. From that moment, I started to despise him. Since then, the seasons have changed, and it is now winter. For me, it doesn't matter whether it's spring, summer, autumn, or winter. I don't care if it's always winter or always summer. I've even considered quitting this job, but Grandpa is still alive. My parents will need care at some point too. I still need to earn a lot for that. With those thoughts, I was mechanically getting through my work during the lunch break on a weekday, my heart filled with emptiness. Then, I got a call from an unexpected person. If it hadn't been registered, I wouldn't have answered. My smartphone displayed sister-in-law. She is Heather Thompson, 46 years old. She's my brother's wife. In other words, she's my sister-in-law. The only time we talked was briefly after their wedding. That's all I remember. Why would she be calling now? Maybe I should just ignore it. But the ringing won't stop. Finally, I sighed and decided to pick up the phone. Yes, this is Linda. Sorry to disturb you at work. This is Heather, Brian's wife? It's been a while. Heather started with an apologetic tone. Ah, that's right. Despite being in a higher position and older, she always maintained a humble attitude. When she suddenly decided to marry my brother, she made sure to greet my parents and me, even on behalf of my brother. To put it simply, she's a good person. That's why I couldn't understand why she would contact me now. It's okay, but do you need something? I tried my best not to sound cold as I asked. It's hard for me to bring this up. Heather hesitated for a moment before continuing. About Betty, your grandmother? What happened to my grandmother? I inadvertently raised my voice. We've been taking care of her on my husband's orders, but it's already past the promised 1 month. Could you possibly come to pick her up? What? I couldn't comprehend what Heather was saying. So, we're taking care of Betty at our... Wait a minute. That was all I could muster. Think, Linda, think. So, you're saying that you've been taking care of my grandmother, Betty, who died 3 months ago? This was the question that came out after thinking hard. I knew it sounded nonsensical, but so did Heather. Yes, we've been taking care of Betty at our... Wait, she died? 3 months ago? A genuinely surprised voice replied. Why don't we calm down a bit, I suggested, and Heather agreed. A few minutes later, regaining my composure, I carefully explained to Heather how my grandmother had passed away. In contrast, Heather's response was utterly perplexing. At the house where Brian and Heather are living, she said, we were told that your grandmother needed care and to take her in until arrangements were made at her home, and that they had been living together with my grandmother. There are 2 possible conclusions. We're both not lying, right? This was the first one. If that's true, then my brother, Brian, is the one lying. This was the second one. I had anticipated it to some extent. The reasons why one would tell such a blatant lie that would be exposed so quickly. But now, there are things I need to do before pursuing that. I'd like to get in touch with Brian right away, but he's basically unreachable on his mobile, I told Heather. I've never used my husband's cell phone either. He won't let me. She continues. However, I think I could talk to him on my cell phone while he's at home. And, she says. And? I interject. He's been working remotely more often lately. I think if I asked, he'd probably be able to have a video call. I certainly think there's a power in face-to-face persuasion. But there's a problem. I'm not even sure where you 2 are living now. I mentioned the issue. We've been living in Y City in California for over 10 years, so it's easy for us to visit your house, Linda, she says. For now, we agreed to talk to Brian on Heather's cell phone at night and ended the call. We devised various other plans with mixed feelings. Y City is just the next town over. How much lying will satisfy him? Expecting me to take care of some stranger's old woman just a few months after Grandma passed away? It's too much. No, it's repugnant. I got home and called Brian on Heather's cell phone at the appointed time of 8 p.m. By the way, Heather is also waiting in my room at home, thanks to her kindness and enthusiasm. Despite my constant attempts to contact him, he answered Heather's cell phone in just 3 rings. I made sure the conversation was audible to Heather by putting the sound on speaker. Heather, where are you right now? You haven't even prepared dinner, he says in an imposing and arrogant tone. He's not the Brian I knew anymore. It's me, Brian, I declare. Huh? He's clearly confused. I thought so, and waited for my brother's words. That's Linda, isn't it? Why? Where's Heather? I'm here, Heather replies tersely. Why are you with Linda? Brian stammers for a moment, then quickly finds his words. Don't tell me. Did you tell Linda about that matter? He asks. Yes, I did, she replies with a calm demeanor. I told you it was too early to talk about it, he exclaims. My brother's sudden shift in attitude about that issue? Of course, it's about our grandmother. I've heard from Heather that you've been working remotely lately, I began. What about it? I could almost see the scowl on my brother's face. Why don't we talk face to face using a remote work app from here on out? I'll send you the ID and password, I suggested. If you refuse, I'll take Linda and go back home. Heather offers a cover fire. Fine. My brother grudgingly agreed in a reluctant tone. I sent the ID and password to my brother using Heather's smartphone. We waited a moment. Although the face that appeared on the computer screen was slightly fatter than the last time I saw him, it was undoubtedly my brother Brian. It's Brian. So, what's so important that we have to face each other to talk about? I'm busy here. His attempt to play dumb at this point made my blood boil. Isn't it obvious? It's about our grandmother. What do you mean by saying we should take in our grandmother who died 3 months ago? To my surprise, he replied calmly. You must be misunderstanding something. My brother calmly continues. Our grandmother isn't dead. I'm taking care of her at my place. It was you, Linda, who asked for this, wasn't it? What? I was at a loss for words. Was he really so afraid of Heather finding out the truth? Could a person really stoop this low? And this was my own brother. I was so angry that I was on the verge of tears. But I sent you a text message, I said through tears. I don't remember. Grandma's here with me right now. Do you want me to bring her here? I want you to bring her here. Brian was completely defiant. I had no time for tears. Brian left his seat and returned a few minutes later with an old woman in a wheelchair. Say hello, Grandma. Linda, it's been a while. I'm Betty. The old woman spoke in a halting voice. I just wanted him to stop this farce. I felt anger boiling up in me again. She's a completely different person. Indeed, the old woman on the computer screen was nothing like my beloved grandmother. For one thing, my grandmother would never call me Linda. As you age, your appearance changes. She's been showing signs of dementia recently, so it can't be helped that her memories of you are vague. Brian seemed determined to deny everything to the bitter end. So, you won't acknowledge the death certificate submitted by the district office? Of course not. Documents can be forged these days. He smirked. I was prepared for this. I had a plan in place. Just wait, I'll show you some evidence too. Evidence? Leaving a perplexed Brian behind, I exit the room. A few minutes later, I return to my room with the evidence. Well, isn't it Brian? Long time no see, you ungrateful one. Grandpa? You were supposed to be bedridden. Faced with the sudden evidence, Brian's eyes grow wide. At one point, I was prepared to die. Even now, I can't go to the bathroom on my own. But my brain's still in good shape. Grandpa continues. I've heard all about it from Linda. Are you saying that the one there next to you is my wife, Betty? Nonsense. Betty was a lot more beautiful. Uh-oh. Cornered, Brian hangs up his phone. He's probably trying to log out of the video call. Heather, who had remained silent till now, spoke up. Are you running away, Brian? Going to Catherine's place? Brian's face turned pale, clearly visible even through the computer screen. How do you know that? I've thought this for a while now, Brian. You underestimate me, Heather insists. Your grandmother has frequently let it slip. Catherine, Catherine. Of course, it's not my name, nor my mother's. Well, that's... I also confirmed with Linda, and she had no recollection of the name Catherine. I had a suspicion for a long time and hired a private detective to investigate possible infidelity. What? The results came out quickly. Pictures of you at the scene of the affair, that your grandmother is Catherine's grandmother, that you have been preparing various things to divorce me. Yes, everything started from Heather's women's intuition that Brian had a high chance of having an affair with another woman. A relationship with a late-20s subordinate at work named Catherine. Brian had taken over the care of her dementia-stricken grandmother to win favor with Catherine. He was also plotting to dump her into a care home and push her off of my family home before admission. That he was planning to divorce Heather without any blame and remarry Catherine using every means possible. Heather proved all of this and then approached me. Honestly, she is an extremely intelligent woman, which seemed unimaginable from her appearance and demeanor. Do you have anything to say? I asked Brian, only intending to listen. I'm really sorry. Forgive me. I didn't mean to deceive you. Heather, too. I'll break up with Catherine, so... said Brian, bowing his head through the screen.
Science these days have certainly developed. We can clearly see your crying face from afar.
Grandpa, please help me. Fool! After using Betty and betraying my beloved granddaughter and daughter-in-law, I don't ever want to see your face again. This is the last time. Linda, you too? Well, the most authoritative person here is Grandpa. And by the way, I also never want to see your face again. Heather! I've already completed the divorce mediation process. I'm going back to my parents' house, so let's meet in court next. Well then, goodbye, big brother. With those words, I hit the exit button on the remote conversation on my laptop. The seasons have changed, and it's now the time of the autumn equinox. I was alone, visiting my grandmother's grave. With hands clasped together, I made various reports in my mind. Brian divorced Heather. Naturally, the outcome was overwhelmingly in Heather's favor. Brian ended up having to pay an enormous amount of alimony and even came crying back home at one point. However, thanks to Grandpa, who's still mentally sharp, a virtual disownment took place. Apparently, even his will states Brian is no longer family. He had wished to remarry Catherine, but women in this world are not so sweet to marry a divorced man in his 50s with not only zero savings, but debt. Eventually, he had to quit his longtime job at the automobile company, and now he's reportedly living in a cheap one-bedroom apartment and paying alimony while working odd jobs. In this day and age, it's probably difficult for someone over 50 with no significant qualifications to get re-employed. It's all a case of reaping what you sow. Most of the information about Brian came from Heather. Heather and I hit it off after that, and we meet quite often for tea as friends. But that being said, I finished everything, Grandmother. I'll come again, I said as I stood up from the gravestone. Then, a slightly strong breeze blew, and at the same time, I heard a voice. A voice I loved so much.
Linda, thank you. Please take care of your grandpa for a little while.
Grandmother? I muttered. Then I suddenly noticed that I was gripping something in my right hand. There was a piece of black candy in my palm. That was strange. I didn't bring any black candy as an offering today. I'm not particularly a believer in gods or ghosts. Could it be Grandmother? No, that couldn't be. There's always black candy at the altar, so I must have picked one up unconsciously and put it in my pocket, then forgot about it. But if I think that my grandmother is still watching over me somewhere, I feel like I can keep doing my best in life. Thank you, Grandmother, I murmured, looking up at the sky, and left the graveyard.